So out taking the dogs for a walk, we always stop at this hotel and take a look at the progress of it being remodeled. There's this giant artillery shell, and I look it up, and it's a 90 millimeter World War II casing sitting out by the trash. And look, it's about a 3.5 inch hole. I could probably make a speaker out of this thing. And so I started thinking about it, and I drew a sketch. And before I did anything, I wanted to take the primer out, which looks like it hadn't been fired yet. So I've got the 40-ton press, and we're going to pop that thing out of there. You can see that it's jolted there. And this primer looked like...
I think that was it.
There it is.
Let's see.
This primer actually looked like it had not been fired, so I was a little worried when doing this that we didn't set it off, but it went okay. And here we had a metal pipe, and then I had the back of an old speaker, a magnet that I had used, and I used a little screw in the end to kind of line it up to that pin there so that it wouldn't slide off to the side and stayed right on the primer.
Go ahead and flip that over. Let's look at the other side of it. Look at that.
And that it looks intact. So that
it's smooth. So we didn't really want to bang on it. And there it is. Whoa. Look at that. It's heavy. Let me see the bottom of that thing.
And there's the date, 1944 is when this thing was made, I'm guessing. And that's what it'd look like if we polished it up. All right, so here's SolidWorks. And I drew up what I want to have this thing look like. And it'll have a little subwoofer on the bottom with 2 3-inch speakers in it. And then another 3-inch speaker in the top. And you can see here the wire is actually sandwiched between 2 15 millimeter pieces of plywood and routes down. That way we don't see the wire going to the upper speaker. All right, so let's go ahead and CNC the stand part of it. You can see that what it's going to do. That's tracing out the track where the wire will go. And oh, it's boring a hole. And that's where the wire is going to lead in to its track so they can get to the top. All right, so there's the outside shape. And I was thinking, I kind of wanted it like a swan. I wanted it to have the look of a swan. So I actually looked at some photographs of swans to get that shape, that billowed, bellied out neck supporting shape there. And here we're going to do the second half of the stand there. And you can see the first half I've taped back into the hole, and I put tape over it so that the vacuum table can hold it down.
Here's our cut, the 2 rings that will mount the driver to the artillery shell. This is the front. So I'm going to pull these up. This will be the front of the low end box that is in the stand. It's upside down right now, and there'll be the 2 woofers there. And this is the back and the insets that will wrap around. The stand will come through and it'll lock into that. And this is the top. And this one I had to kill the program because it cut this. This was supposed to be a Kerf cut. It was supposed to cut most of the way through so that I could bend it. And it cut it all the way through. So I stopped that program and just continued on with the rest. And I'll have to cut this piece again after I figure out what I did wrong.
Now to calculate the curve cuts, what I did was I took the project in SolidWorks and I measured the arc length of that curvature from tangent to tangent of the outside of the curvature, and I measured it on the inside of the curvature. And I looked at the difference between those 2 lengths. And then I divided that distance by the thickness of the router bit, which is 1/8 of an inch. It was about 1 inch that I needed, so I needed 8 cuts in order to get that angle. So I added 1 more cut, made it 9, so I had a little bit of play, so it wouldn't be too tight there. And then I cut them down to within 1.5 millimeters of the other side. So we had very little wood to bend there. If you have too much wood, it'll splinter. If you don't have enough wood, it'll break. But 1.5 millimeters seemed about right.
Cool. So next step is to glue the 2 halves together.
And we'll do some painting with glue. and we'll make sure we get it everywhere. We don't need a lot. We just need it to be wet.
All right, let's take a look and see what we got.
And we'll sand this down really well. We'll get rid of any remnants of the seam.
All right, let's glue the front onto the back.
And what's going to be important here is that we're lined up left to right, and we want to make sure that we have a perpendicular angle there.
So here's the base ready for the kerf bending. This front part is glued on along with the support, and the rear part is screwed on so that it's going to be removable.
Now I'm going to prepare this piece to be kerf bent. And to do that, we're going to get it wet and soften the wood and let it sit for a little while. If we try and bend it while it's dry, it'll crack, especially when you're cross-grained like this. If your grain is parallel to the kerf bend, it'll bend very easily, but it won't be as strong. And this is a little bit stronger method to do it. And I'm using warm water here, hot water. All right, so there's the kerf bend, and I'm pushing it down, and look at that. It's got just about the right amount that I'm looking for. Folds down, and the other side, and look at that. It lines up pretty darn well. We can always trim the bottom if we need to. And here you can see I put the track in, and that's going to hold the wire when it slides down through the top of the subwoofer. Without that, it would pinch and get caught. And this is the Derman's rock hard water putty that I'm going to use to fill the voids and any other aberrations.
So there's the seam between the two pieces of wood that are here too. So I'm going to try and just put some of this there to minimize, because you really don't want to see that line. So now I'm going to sand this with 150 grit sandpaper.
And also, we get little fibers from the kerf bend that need to be sanded off. When you get the wood wet, it makes it rough. And we just want to sand things in general if we want a good finish on this. All right, so we're going to use a 1/4-inch roundover bit with this router. I've got that clamped in. I'll do it one-handed while I'm holding the phone in the other. And there's the look that we're going for. And we'll get the other one done here.
I've diluted some wood glue down with some water, and we're going to paint all of the end grain so that it's sealed, and that way it'll take the paint. We won't see those lines. Otherwise the paint will absorb into it, and it'll be very difficult to get it to look nice on the end grain. And we just want it to be smooth. And we're just going to put a very thin coat of wood glue on there. All right, so I've mixed up some surfboard epoxy resin, and I'm going to dump it down into the kerfs to make them really rigid and keep filling up these areas that I use tape to create. Let it soak down in and just keep refilling and refilling. And what will happen is this resin will drip down in. It'll go all the way to the bottom, and it'll also find any voids in the wood and fill those up as well, which is a side benefit of this. You can see it soaked into the wood. You can see the darkening of the wood, and you can see where it's leaking through any cracks and filling voids. Pull this tape off of here and take a look at the resin. Now, I've done this before it's fully hardened, and the reason I do that is so that I can scrape off the excess epoxy with a razor blade, and it's easier than sanding it once it's fully reached its hardened process there. This is going to be good. Rock solid. So here's the shell. Now we're going to need to take this gaff tape off of here. There's a divot, a little bit of a dent in there. The end is no longer round. I'll have to figure out a way to make that round. Yeah, I don't know why there was a World War II artillery shell sitting in the hotel trash. They were remodeling the hotel, so maybe they found it in a storage area or stuffed away somewhere, but someone's taped something onto here. So cleaning off the old gaff tape, I'm going to use
some lighter fluid for that, barbecue lighter fluid. It does a really good job of getting rid of that old tape residue. We can see the roundness of that is leaving a little bit to be desired. To round this out, I've got this piece of scrap wood, which was left over from making the stand part, that had almost the exact diameter of the shell itself.
All right, I'm kind of rethinking the shiny brass versus just cleaning this up a bit. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use some 500 sandpaper, wet, and I'm just gonna take the top layer off and just polish it up a little bit, but try and leave the color and see what that looks like.
Yeah, so it'll take my time here and just keep going over it little by little. I don't want to dig in and make it uneven. So by using a fairly fine grit sandpaper and going over it multiple times, it should look more natural than trying to really hack away. And we can see that it's starting to come through.
I left some varnish on there, shined it up a bit. I think I won't coat it or anything, so it'll kind of dull and it can be polished over time. It's kind of cool. We can now see the 90 millimeter M19. So this will go in here like so, and this will be mounted on top of it. So it'll go like this. And this will go on top of that. And maybe we'll paint this ring red. It'll look cool red.
Here's a look at the setup. So this is the amplifier that I'm going to put inside, and it's rated at 50 watts a channel plus a subwoofer at 100 watts. So theoretically that's a 200 watt amp. Hard to believe, and I'll do a video testing this out as well. We'll have some fun comparing it to an actual Pro amp rated at half the power. And here you can see that I CNC'd in the amp mount and the rear plate mount. So this amp will just mount right into there, and then the knobs will fit through the back. And we have bass and treble, subwoofer level, subwoofer frequency, and overall volume. And it'll be Bluetooth to Bluetooth in, and then there'll be a switch to run this off of a amplifier, an external amp as well.
So for the speaker subwoofers, I want to use this Aura NS3, and it's a 3-inch rubber surround inverted cone speaker. These things sound good, and I've had a really good result with these in the past, but I need this to go down low, and to go really low we got to do some modifications.
All right, so this is the first run at this, and I put too much weight in. There was too many bolts. I ended up just using resin alone and no extra bolts in the end, and porting the cabinet instead of having it sealed after doing some testing later on. I tried several different versions and different amounts of weight to increase the mass. Low-end tuning was great. It just didn't handle enough power and get loud enough.
And we're going to slide this into here. This will go in the back here. We've got our CNC of our little plate there. All right, so here's the little back plate that's going to mount the connectors. All right, so I changed the design and I want to put a ducted port in that I didn't design originally with the CNC. We measure to about halfway in the middle of the surrounds. Alright, there's the amp mounted and speaker terminals coming from the back. The switch that will switch between passive and active mode. Here's the parts to do the assembly. I've got the speaker that I'm going to use here. I switched it out with a different version than I intended before. I did some testing and this one was a little smoother. This will mount into this ring here. Will fit over the end of this. Here's our two drivers with the resin weighted, and eventually I'll put a passive crossover in, but I'm not going to do that right now. This has got two outputs plus a sub with the volume control on the right, and bass and treble and subwoofer volume and crossover. There's our insulation, and this will fit inside of here. Having a long tubular or cylindrical surface can create standing waves where the sound goes back and forth, and we want to break those up. So I'm going to put this inside of here such that the distances are different. We'll have distance number 1 from the back of the tube to the first disc, distance number 2, and then distance number 3 from the driver. This whole thing will slide into the chamber here and sit into this notch.
So the goal of this design was to take something that was destructive and turn it into something beautiful and enjoyable. And this World War II artillery shell was perfect for a 3-inch speaker. I wanted the subwoofer to go very low. I wanted to sound like a real deep low end, unnaturally low. One of the sacrifices for that is that it won't get as loud. And as far as the mids and highs, I monoed out the Bluetooth using a couple resistors, and I wanted it to be a very forward sound. It's an artillery shell. It's pointing at you, and it's long and tubular, so it's got kind of almost an aggressive top end to it, slightly. Followed by a very deep low end, kind of reminiscent of sounds that you don't normally hear in a home hi-fi. So I weighted the speakers down with surfboard resin that I poured into the cones, and for the top speaker I used something that's fairly directional, and just tried a couple things that I had laying around the house. All in all, I wanted the design also to embrace some natural beauty by looking at swans, the holding of the swan neck. I looked at a bunch of pictures, and it's supposed to kind of look like that from the side. Kind of combine mechanics with nature, destructive with beautiful and enjoyable, and I chose the red and white, kind of the blood and truth and clarity and cleanliness to augment the design. It's not meant to be a true high fidelity speaker as much as something that is unique and has a unique sound by having the mids and highs so far from the sub, and the sub reproducing some of those lower mids. You know, there are some differentials there. For like a TV center speaker or in the corner of a room. And the Bluetooth in makes it very handy. It comes up and it's going to be a wonderful addition to my artistic speaker endeavors. I hope you liked the build and thank you for joining.